My name is Eric Van Horn. I bought my first franchise in my 20s, and since then, I've owned 6 brands with 25 stores in 8 states. I've also helped 1,000 people find the right franchise for them. People like us who are not cut out for the 9 to 5 and like to work smarter, not harder. How do we find the right franchise, buy it, grow it, sell it, and how do we do it in a way to own the business without it owning us? Those are the questions, and I'm on a mission to give you the answers. Welcome to Franchise Secrets. Welcome to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Eric Van Horn here with today's guest, Shawn Goldsmith. Shawn was an IFA Next Gen winner, used to teach franchising at Cornell University, multi-unit franchisee, working with franchisors as a consultant, and is deep into the supplier world and is a little bit crazy doing all kinds of things like me. So, Shawn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Eric. I'm really excited.
Absolutely. I want to dive into the supplier world. I think that's going to be a fascinating conversation, both for the franchisees out there listening and the franchisors to understand that mysterious world in some ways and how to navigate that. But before we get to that, I want to, take us back to your entry into franchising to give people some context.
That's a funny story. So I was in an organization called DECA in high school. Distributed Education Clubs of America, and it's really a business curriculum for high schools. And I applied for the Don DeBolt Scholarship, and I ended up being chosen as the recipient for that year. And every year we have an annual convention at DECA, and you have a chance to meet your scholarship sponsor. So that year, Stan Friedman was the scholarship sponsor for the Don DeBolt Scholarship, meaning he was at DECA and was like the mentor. And we really hit it off. And at some point, a few weeks later, he said, "Listen, Shawn, I really like your passion for franchising. I know you're new to it. Why don't you come to the IFA convention? IFA is willing to sponsor one student, and I recommended you, and they're willing to do it."
And this was Stan or Don that recommended you?
It was Don's scholarship, but Stan Freeman recommended me.
And Don DeBolt, great guy. He was chair of the IFA for I don't know how long. And we were fellow franchisees at a brand that I owned. And I know his son very well, who's done some amazing things in franchising. And I had some fun with Don. He's just a fantastic guy. So that's who the scholarship was named after. You got the scholarship, got hooked up with Stan, and then found yourself at the IFA.
Right, exactly. And just to give you a reference from time, that was when Steve Greenbaum was exiting as the chairperson and Dina was becoming the chairperson. And then for about 8 or 9 years, I didn't go to any events. I went to college, I went to Cornell. And what I did is I invited a lot of the speakers to come to the school. So Joe Bordeaux was a speaker. Doug Palmer was a speaker. We had Dan Monahan was a speaker. And we had a lot of people come to the school. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I re-entered franchising, and I've been active ever since. But, I started with knowing nothing, and now that's all I do.
And so how old are you today?
Now I'm 29.
So still in your 20s, and you've done a lot in franchising, respected. And we talked about it. You're a franchisee, multi-unit franchisee. You want to talk about that a little bit to give some context into, you're actually doing this stuff?
Sure. And just, one thing I wanted to mention. So, I'm thinking of it through different angles. So I'm a supplier and a franchisor and a franchisee, or I consult for franchisors. But on the franchisee angle, I'm trying to understand how to better work with the franchisor. So Doc Cohen's really been instrumental in the last 3 or 4 years. So we never met at that early stage, but since then, Doc's really taken me under his wing and has taught me everything from the franchisee perspective, which is something I didn't really know about until recently. So that's where I've been spending a lot of focus. But to answer your question, with Tutor Doctor, what we're trying to do is have an entry point for students to be exposed to franchising. So, students with the class that, we were doing at Cornell, this is their first exposure to franchising.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a student, at least personally, I felt you had to do something very corporate. I did investment banking. A lot of my friends did consulting, accounting. And then the entrepreneurship was very open-ended. You create an app or you start from scratch, but there was nothing where you had a business, where you had some support. So obviously franchising is that option, but taking it a step further, what we're trying to do at Tutor Doctor is seed some of these franchise units with tutors and actual lines of business, so that if a student wanted to own a franchise, it's one thing to say, hey, you're now a franchisee. It's another to say, look, you have a line of business, you have 30 tutors, you might have 15 houses that have tutoring. Now that we've given you some book of business with a team, now you can grow it and you can make it yours. But it's to really help facilitate a student to own and operate a franchise.
So you're in it as a franchisee, multi-units. Is that where you live, or is that out in a different market?
So that's it. So the units are all throughout the United States.
No, your units.
Yeah, so I have some in Atlanta, but some are spread out in different states outside of Georgia. So Tutor Doctor is based in Toronto.
Yep.
But I moved to Atlanta because the majority of the franchisors, if you want to meet anyone in franchising, Atlanta is the city to be.
Oh, there's a bunch of them.
New York, yeah, which is New York's finance. San Francisco, I lived in, is tech. Atlanta is franchising. But the idea is, even though I own the franchises, ideally the students would transition as a partial or autonomous owner of the units.
That's great. That's great. Mentoring,
so I'm
right?
Building them up. You know.
Mentoring.
Yeah, but it's mentoring with a book of business, so that they have an opportunity to get started, and they're not starting from scratch. So they have the support and they have a business to work on. And, one story I didn't tell you about. So, one area I told you I learned a little later in this process was at the franchisee side. So I worked in Doc's stores. So Doc has some great American cookie stores in the stores, but I had a group of students from Cornell help on how we could improve the stores. And it was like a consulting case study, but it was hands-on learning. And for that really helped me learn about like how it was to operate a business. But that was more of a consulting type of project. This would be, hey, we're going to teach you franchising and you can learn, but while you're growing your business. So it's not just learning from a lecture,
yep.
PowerPoint slide. You're actually having a real practicum. And that's the best types of classes I went through in school, were practicum learning. So the types of franchises we're creating here would serve as a learning mechanism, and it's something they could touch and actually understand that if they could ramp up quickly, they could own that book of business.
And franchisees out there, I mean, this is an exit strategy, period. If you're a franchisee, you want to exit at some point, you should be looking at your existing base of employees there. And don't look at them just if they have money, because this is something where you can fund it. If they're really good, they might have some outside funding options, family members, because they'll invest into somebody that actually has experience in whatever it is, and there's a book of business already. So don't underestimate your current employee base as somebody that can take it, and that's an exit strategy for you. It doesn't always happen, but it's happened to me a handful of times. That's how I've transitioned out of some of my franchises that I've owned. And I mean, you're going into it strategically doing that in a way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the idea is that the student would either own it outright or would own a large part of the franchise.
And the thing with this, franchisees listening, they have an owner mentality. It's not just a hired gun. It's not someone that's just working for a wage, or it's just a side hustle for them. This is something that they see themselves in. They're giving their heart to it, and they are thinking about it through the lens of an owner. And it's hard to pay for that. I mean, I'm a huge believer in having key employees be having the mindset of a business owner.
And the step that I'm trying to take further, where I haven't quite got there. So I've had teaching in a vacuum, and this is somewhat in a vacuum, but what I'm trying to marry is the concept of teaching franchising over a year or semester with more of like the standard lessons, but marrying it with a live practicum so they could grow their business at the end. By the end of the course, they would actually have a book of business, and if they decided they wanted to pursue that, then they have that option. But they're actually building something while they're learning. Because the thing that one of my gripes with standardized education is you learn, but sometimes it goes out the other ear after the class. Here, you actually build something and have something to show.
Yep. I love it. Let's transition to a little bit of the consulting that you do for a franchisor. And then I want to dive into the supplier world, because I know different suppliers. I know franchisors. I'm becoming a franchisor myself in the roofing business. We just about have our disclosure document done, myself and two other partners. So we're getting close to that. I have a private Facebook group for franchisors and franchisees. So this whole incubation process for franchisees and franchisors is happening. But you consult with franchisors. Give us some insight into that.
Sure. And the funny thing is, my grandfather was a roofer in Brooklyn, and it was my great grandfather was too. And it was so long ago. The number was 4 digits if you wanted to call them.
That's something. Was it a good business for him?
Yeah, I guess so. He met Mike Tyson through it, so it's interesting. But anyway,
we're not afraid to get sidetracked on this podcast.
Well, I'm pretty bad at that. I'm the king of non sequiturs.
All right, back to consulting then.
Right. So on the franchisor end, so I work with WSI, Digital Marketing. It's one of the largest digital marketing franchises, and we're trying to build upon the offer. And the tricky thing with it is, you have the whole concept of franchising is standardization and reducing agency costs. And with digital marketing, it changes so frequently.
Mm-hmm.
Something that was cutting edge 6 months ago or a year ago could be obsolete. So how do you create something that's standardized, but at the same time is adaptive? So you have to have some wiggle room where it is adaptive, but still it's within the lanes where the franchisor can control it,
mm-hmm.
and have franchisee input that could help grow the offer. So with that, I work with the leadership, but I work a lot with the franchisees, and it's a pretty cool dynamic because I'm learning, from the trenches with the franchisees, and I'm also a little bit of a digital marketer myself. And then I go to corporate and I say what I learn, and then we create the strategy from there. And it's a process, like a cyclical loop.
How often someone like you that's, comes from a background, the academic background that you have, but likes to learn hands-on, is that pretty common, or is that something that's a little bit more unique?
That's a good question. I'm not very sure, but, I would say that personally for me, and some of my friends that I know, the classes we got the most out of were where we were put in an environment and had to learn, where there was like a lab component.
Mm-hmm.
Like my favorite class in school, or one of them, was negotiations. And we always had a case study, and we always had to act out the case studies. And then we had a briefing on how everyone did at the end of the case. So I got something out of that. You can't slide by, right? You could memorize it for a test,
yep.
Take the test, and it's over. For practicum, you have to be fully engaged.
I learned by doing. I wasn't the best student, but I definitely learned by doing, and I still do. But now I consume a bunch of content. I read books all the time. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm always taking courses. I'm always learning. But in school, I was not that guy, and I think it just wasn't. I hated to take tests, but I loved to do things.
Oh yeah, and just one note on that. I mean, you could be I hate people that say they have to be in a specific swim lane. So when I was in school, even though I was involved in some franchising and I was transitioning from investment banking, I studied a ton of military history.
Mm-hmm.
Because strategy, actually the word strategos for history is the Greek word for general. So strategy derives from military history, and a lot of business strategy is coming from military history. So I'm always into exploring different things that might not seem on face value relevant, but really changes your way of thinking for what you do daily.
You have to do that. And I'm a big fan of that as well. I mean, if you're just in your lane and all you're reading are specific business books, you're going to be thinking like everybody else. But the best people think differently. You're looking at it from a different angle. And that's an excellent example of military or fighting or different things. I mean, there's a lot of strategy that goes into that. And if you're able to, like you as a consultant or as a supplier, you have to be able to look at things differently from different angles to come up with the best solutions, not just the solutions that everybody has presented in the past.
Right. And I mean, you do more things than I do, but you're in those 3 buckets: franchisee, franchisor, supplier.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a franchisee, you could think, wait, as a franchisor, we could change the way we do that. Or as a supplier, this is really what franchisees want. So even having different perspectives on the same issue is also important.
Yeah. Coming as myself, being a franchisee for so long, helping sell a bunch of franchises as a salesperson or franchise development person, then being one of the top consultants in the country, I've got these different angles, and I am seeing franchisors wanting to know what I think about franchising as a franchisee, because I'll deliver truth to them, but I've seen it with multiple brands. It's not just one brand. And I realize that franchisors are hungry for that. They're hungry for somebody like me who has 6 different brands over almost 20 years of experience, what I see as that franchisee-franchisor relationship, and not just looking at it just from one angle. because they need that. And I see more franchisors becoming hungry for that. I'm sure you probably see the same thing as a consultant, right?
No, for sure. And I mean, like, even with your different lines of business. So if you have like franchise education and you're also a franchise broker, you could be bringing them more qualified candidates because they actually have franchise experience, maybe not even hands on, but you've immersed them in some type of learning where they're not just coming cold off the street and entering a franchise. So you're able, through your different lines, to offer a better product in all your types of business ventures.
Let's dive into the supplier world. I have friends that are suppliers. I've known suppliers. I think it's a great business model in franchising. Sometimes I think it's better than being a franchisee or a franchisor is being a supplier, because you know, once you're in, and if you're good, you continue to stay in and you get more business. Because it's franchising the small world. Let's face it. I mean, there's not the franchisors come and go, but when you're in the circles that we're in, it's a small world, and you start to get to know everyone. So how did you get into the supplier world?
That's how I started, actually. So after I did investment banking, I went into tech. I worked at Oracle as a salesperson, and I was really good at sales, but using LinkedIn and digital. So I used to teach people how to sell with a woman by the name of Jill Rowley. So she's like pretty well known for this type of selling. And then I became a marketer. So I had a again, the idea of two different perspectives. I had a sales perspective, and then I went from sales enablement to marketing. So now I had the three buckets covered. And after my marketing job, I was in charge of like about $250,000 budget for this French startup in San Francisco for their office. I created Markery, which is my consultancy. And from there, now I had a background in digital. And then going to the beginning of the story where, I went to the convention, and then Stan introduced me to, Joe Bordeaux, who ended up speaking at my college, Doug Palmer, Mark and Mary Kay Liston, who they didn't even recognize me when I came back. It'd been so long, but I met all those people. Now, I'm a grown person. I have lines of business. So I said, instead of doing digital marketing in San Francisco with other people that do the same thing and have the same perspective, I really like franchising. I never really had the opportunity to fully go all in because it's not really offered in traditional curriculum. Why don't I do digital marketing type of activities and consulting, but to non-tech sectors? So the three I chose was franchising, nonprofits, and education. So with education, I would help with CRMs and marketing automation, but for students. So at Cornell, I implemented several marketing automation instances. Nonprofits, we help them with their Google ad grants. It's part of digital marketing. And then franchising, I didn't really know where to go, but it's what I'm doing right now. But that's how I got started. And again, I didn't really think about this till we're talking, but I had all these different perspectives, and I said the arbitrage, or I don't know if that's the right word, but the amount of value I'm bringing to those industries from a tech digital perspective is a lot more than I could deliver to the people that are already doing that pretty much daily in San Francisco, where everything's tech.
Yeah. When you were doing marketing automation, are you using Infusionsoft, HubSpot? Like, what do you use?
That's funny.
We're getting into it here now.
Yeah, you know your stuff, man. So my history, let's see. So at Oracle acquired Eloqua. So Jill was the top salesperson at Eloqua, and that's where I started learning about marketing automation. Then over time, when I was at Benitasoft, the French company, I managed Pardot, which is Salesforce's version. Okay. Even though sold Eloqua to Salesforce, they ended up acquiring Pardot, and then Pardot became the mainstream, connects with Salesforce CRM. And then, I was looking for an option that was a little bit more cost effective, more for SMBs. I briefly worked with Act On. These are all like enterprise solutions. But over time, I started working with a company, SharpSpring. It was okay. It's very similar to Infusionsoft. But recently, and it's a WSI supplier. But I also recently negotiated a deal with VBout, which is it's a little bit of a different version of marketing automation. It's similar, but there's some nuances to it. And now they're a WSI supplier. So I personally work on VBout right now.
Perfect.
But I've gone through that cycle. So I'm always looking for what's cutting edge.
And it's always changing. And it's not easy. Like, you get into these softwares, and I mean, for me, I learned it, but then you have to, I had to hire people to help like build some of this stuff. It's not like it used to be back in, Act or Salesforce, back in the day. It's a beast now how it integrates with social, and you just build these campaigns and everything happens. But it's a double-edged sword. It's fantastic until it doesn't work. It's a disaster.
Right. And what they're doing is they're trying to make all these platforms are trying to consolidate to say, you don't need 3 tools, just use us.
Yep.
And then and we didn't even talk about franchise specific tools that do some of that. So, anyways, I've gone through all of them throughout my marketing automation journey.
So you're helping franchisors with that marketing automation, and is it to get leads for franchisees? Is that the thing, or are there multiple things that you're doing for them?
So with WSI, we're trying to find the right tools for the franchisees. So marketing automation is a bucket. So WSI has different flavors. So we have a partnership with HubSpot, SharpSpring, and VBout. So the franchisee can choose. So again, it's within a swim lane, right? Somewhat standardized, but it's somewhat flexible.
Yep.
Because HubSpot might be, is more expensive, but it has more capabilities, right? So I help, manage some of those deals or negotiate some of those.
What do you see? Go ahead.
No, it's okay.
I see some challenges in franchisors with sales processes, sales systems, consumer-facing sales processes. Very few have marketing automation like you're talking about, where a lead comes in, whether it's for a gym membership or for someone that needs a roof done, or whatever it is, a consumer inquires, and then there's marketing automation that happens after that. And there needs to be a process around it. So marketing automation, lead comes in, it needs to trigger something to happen, whether it's a text, an email, or someone to actually make a phone call. God forbid you have to actually pick up the phone and make a phone call, but it tells somebody it's time to make a phone call. And then whether they leave a voicemail or not, then it goes into the next stage in the process. And that might be a text message. It might be an email. But there's a whole process that should be happening. And I see a lot of franchisors very weak in this area. Is this kind of what you're talking about?
Yes. So we do a lot of that, but it's not exclusive to franchisors. I would say we help people with that on the marketing end for companies that are either franchisees that are doing B2B sales or tech companies that are trying to break into selling to franchises.
So B2B sales, give me some examples of that, because that's what I was referring to as franchisees. And so B2B franchisee, who might that be? Like, give me some industries for that.
Sure. So, we have, so many different use cases. We have a franchisee we're working with that focuses on selling to wineries. So figuring out the best process for that. Someone that sells to senior care franchisees and to traditional senior care, which is called like a CCRC. That's more brick and mortar. We have people that are selling to tech companies. Again, like it's B2B, but they're not huge. These are, I'd call these SMBs. So it's B2B. So I guess there's 3 things you could do to take a step back. You have B2C, which is where everyone's focused on. Like when people are talking Facebook and all these, whatever, it's B2C usually. But you have B2B marketing and and you have more wiggle room, because even if you just close 2 deals, the payoff could be massive. But I'd break down B2B into a step further. You have B2B very large companies like Fortune 1000, and then you have B2B SMBs. So our sweet spot is the B2B SMBs. And I would consider a lot of franchisees, if you think of them as a business, they could be an SMB. Like sometimes you have like a Doc Hone or some of these franchisees that have a lot of franchise locations. They're bigger sometimes than a franchisor.
Yeah.
But people outside of franchising, like yourself, when you were in the hair business. So anyways, we like to focus on that SMB B2B. Like we have a company, we help them focus on franchise loans to franchisees. I keep thinking we
talked about that company. That's not a small little company. That's a bigger company that you're working with. We're not going to name it because it's right. But that's a bigger company. That's, a well-known company out there in the franchise world that you're helping with that.
Right. So, someone said to me recently, they're like, you don't sound like a salesperson. You sound like more like an academic. So like we like to strategically think of where we should go like who the lead is, who the persona is. We try all different types of drips and messaging.
Mm-hmm.
So people, I think, are obsessed on the medium, be it like we use a lot of LinkedIn for B2C. We don't play there that much, but texting, I think, is a great option.
Yep.
You have to do email, but those are all mediums. What is more important is I think, two things. One is the messaging. What is the specific pain points? And the thing is, you and I take guesses if we're going into the vertical. We might not know it. We have to test and validate it first. But the second thing is what we do with lead gen is sometimes we'll go to a marketplace where we know people are very active. So, for example, for tech companies, sometimes we'll do some lead gen activities on like a tech site where we know founders are speaking with each other and they're messaging each other instead of just saying, oh, it has to be LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a good starting point, but you need to go to where the customers are, right? So that's, we try to think of like another layer ahead.
There's a lot that goes into this, and you just glossed over some of it. You're like, and the messaging. Well, messaging is copy, and to get the right copy, the right message, to hit the right pain points in the right way, and to have the solution to the pain point, all of that takes a lot of work, testing, and you have to know your stuff. And that's one of the things, like Bedros Keuilian and I, we have the Franchise Ignition Mastermind. It's one of the things he's a genius at is copy and the tech world with all of that. But that's no small thing. And, as somebody that's not good, trained in writing good copy, writing good messaging, you need to have somebody that does that for you. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, and listen, I'm not saying I'm great at copy or our team is great at copy, but what our premise is, we say to the client, let's make a hypothesis. This is the vertical you want to go after. That's great. What are the major pain points? And we don't know the answer, but the whole point is, yes, it's really, really difficult. I think some people try to say, oh, I know what it is. No, you don't know until the data tells you. So when you see lead responses at 20% on one pain point and everything else is between 5 and 8, say, look, there's something going on here. Let's kill these. And now let's take this pain point and let's create a new set of A/B tests, which are variations of this pain point. And that's what we've done. So, I mean, I could think of so many specific examples, but I think the key with copy is signaling. So there's all these small little words. Words. So, for example, in the wine business, eating my words here, it's my New York accent when I get excited. But like in the wine business, you don't say increase wine sales. You say you want to increase your DTC, which is direct to consumer, because you get more margin when you sell directly. I mean, you should have some with restaurants and distributors, but that's where you make more a margin. So when you say to a wine owner B2C, they know that you know the industry, or they know that you know what I mean? So, but that's just one point. But that type of nomenclature needs to be throughout all your messaging with the pain point. And that's where it's difficult. So we try to work with the client to get that out of them and put it in the message, as opposed to if I could send a message to the winery and to the senior care and to the franchisee who wants a loan, it's a bad message. It needs to be very specific. You have to know the customer avatar. That is something that probably a lot of people listening have not really heard that. That is so elementary to people like you and myself, but you need to have that customer avatar and know that customer, know their pain points and know what they're running from, what they're running to, all of that stuff. And if this is like foreign language to you right now, you probably need to do some deeper dives into this whole thing on how to really market your business. And I'll probably have to do some more podcasts. Maybe have to have you back on to do a deeper dive into this. But the world of suppliers, like what are some of the top takeaways as we start to wrap things up, the top takeaways that you would give advice to as a franchisor, to the franchisor and to the franchisee? Like what would you say to them about if they're wanting to get some wisdom or some value bombs on the world of suppliers? Maybe they're a new franchisor and they don't know what they don't know. Yeah, so I mean, a new concept I'm working on, or I'm trying to build upon with the WSI team is so the way it works is we look for cutting edge suppliers, right, to become part of the WSI ecosystem. So instead of just signing an agreement to say, hey, you're part of the ecosystem, what we're doing more and more of is we're validating it with a small group of franchisees. So what I recommend, and I think franchisees have a lot of power, but they don't exercise it sometimes. So if you're a multi-unit franchisee and you say, look, to the franchisor, we really have an issue here. I'm willing to validate this tool and test it. And then usually that supplier, whatever it is, let's say it's like a social media tool, I don't know, and you're really struggling on B2C sales. They'll say, look, there's this really cool B2C Facebook supplier. I'm willing to test it for my 8 stores. Now that supplier will usually give you a big break on pricing because you're giving them an entryway.
Yep.
And now for the franchisor, you're doing them a favor because you're validating it for them before they jump into a contract. So I think, people a lot of times are black and white, like, oh, we have to sign and fix this pain point, or no, we can't do it. It's breaking brand standards. So I think a smart way of doing it is having a multi-unit franchisee, or maybe 2 or 3 that are close, and say, look, let's validate this together. We'll go to the franchisor, let them know, but it'll be closed. And then the supplier will give you breaks and special incentives because they really want to prove it. And you will benefit as the franchisee because the supplier needs to make you successful in order to get the contract.
That's excellent advice. And it happened to me this last month. A supplier came to me and said, Eric, we want to work with you because we want to get into this brand that you're part of. And so we will basically do whatever we can do for you to prove that we can do what we say we're going to do if we can get an introduction to the franchisor. And I don't even know, the business partner brought that to me, and I don't even know what we ended up doing to it, but that is 100% how it happens. Position that to the franchisor correctly, everyone. Don't just say, here's what I'm doing. You've got to go in and sell it to the franchisor and be willing to test it because it might not work. And then you've wasted time and some money and on something that didn't work, but it also might be the next best thing. And then you start to win points with the franchisor by bringing in a really good supplier. So excellent advice.
Tell you this, the supplier will love you and they'll bend over backwards and do whatever they need, and they'll give you preferential pricing. They'll work really hard on your account. So you're positioning yourself in a good place.
So good. So good. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate your time today. And we'll have to get you on next time to go deeper into the digital sales world. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to whatever channel you're listening on. If you want my help with anything from buying a franchise to franchising your business, please visit franchisesecrets.com.